Welcome to the 14th episode of the Chaplain's Assistance Motor Pod, and I am your host, Gary. If this is your first time at the Motor Pod, this is the bi-weekly podcast where I discuss my world of G.I. Joe, what current events are striking my fancy, what I'm reading, playing with, or just excited to talk about. Mostly, it's just me grousing about my embarrassment of riches littered about my basement, my storage area. Essentially, my pit or my motor pool. And each episode, I wrap it all up in a nice little bow by taking a closer look at a vehicle that I've probably tripped over in the past week or so. This week, the Motor Pod is stationed at Plymouth Rock, the home of the Pilgrims and the first Thanksgiving in the United States of America. The Thanksgiving holiday is imminent as I record this into the tape deck of a Havoc. Chaplain Katzenbogen is fishing, but I don't think he should be using a spring-loaded recoilless rifle. But I'm hungry to talk Joe, so let's dig in. A quick thing, hopefully I can get this posted in time, is Comixology is having a sale on all the trade paperbacks of G.I. Joe Real American Hero through Volume 20. That takes you through issue 200. This doesn't include special missions, and they are only $1.99 each. In my collecting habits, I felt it was worth it because for $2 for 10 issues, 20 cents a book. I am currently leaning away from having a trade paperback collection in addition to my comic book collection. Just takes up a good deal of space. And putting them on my tablet is great because when I'm on the go, I'm on a trip and my wife's driving, I can just read them along there. And also, it helps keep my hands, my grubby mitts, off my original copies. This might also help space some more by me not having to keep 3 copies of particular issues. I'm looking at you, issue 21. And that's something that I felt mention if, you're into digital comics or if you're into just reading good books, that's something to look into. $2 is very affordable. You're looking at $2 times 25, it's only $40, and that gets you all the Marvel run and a quarter or a fifth of the way at this point into the IDW, A Real American Hero continuation. In the comic book hot takes department, IDW solicited their new series, G.I. Joe's Saturday Morning Adventures. Am I exciting for a new G.I. Joe series? Well, with this series, I've got mixed feelings. First off, I'm sad Paul Allure isn't continuing on with his series, as I was excited for his new direction of G.I. Joe. It was a fresh take that was accessible for just about all ages. Really, the audience was anybody that's experiencing or currently experiencing puberty. It was great. Also, I usually don't get excited for other comic book adaptations from a cartoon show. I grew up with the cartoon. It has aged mostly very well. The audience is a younger crowd than the Real American Hero comic. And usually, characterizations of a children's show don't translate well into a young adult, moving on into refusing to grow up adult comic book series, as it ends up with an awkward or just a shuddery or cringy experience with the characterizations not really meshing well with an aging up. The other thing is cartoons also don't always carry the weight of permanent change. Cartoons are typically an adventure, and the characters essentially don't grow or suffer permanent consequences throughout the course of the series. Again, Saturday morning cartoon shows from the 80s and early 90s are episodic in fashion. Very few had overarching storylines. And the other thing is, the beginning of every cartoon episode is a reset where the bad guys are always bad. They're typically not too many redeeming qualities present. You're not looking for overarching story themes. And the guys are bad with a wacky premise, and they always get away. That being said, I am giving G.I. Joe Saturday Morning Adventures a chance. Part of that is the creative team behind it. You have the writer, Eric Burnham, artist Dan Schoening, and colorist Luis Delgado. The reason why I'm giving this creative team a chance is I've read their work on several of their comics for IDW's Ghostbusters. I've been reading some of those stories too, and now with my son for 2 years. They're entertaining, and I'm hoping they can capture that younger audience. We want those younger readers, right? Hashtag the 4-color campaign, anyone? And if anything, this might be a more accessible way to get these kids away from their screens. The artist Dan Schoening has, from my experience with his Ghostbusters runs, has been able to ape the animated art style as well, and he also does a good job inking himself. And Burnham's writing with the Ghostbusters, he has seemed to get it. In the ad copy from IDW, the solicit does imply that he gets Sunbow G.I. Joe as well. That hopefully bodes well for moving forward with this. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if Schoening gets the Sunbow flavor of G.I. Joe as well. And finally, just because there's that nagging thought in my head, and I have to mention it, G.I. Joe wasn't a Saturday morning cartoon like Ghostbusters was. So I know it's catchy to name it that, but it's just frustrating for a 40-something person like me, even though it's probably only going to bother me and not anybody else. The copy reads, everyone knows that G.I. Joe is the codename for America's daring, highly trained special mission force, and that their purpose is to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless criminal organization determined to rule the world. That's straight out of the opening of the cartoon series. Now, Cobra has launched the Aladdin Initiative, their most versatile weapon yet, challenging Duke, Scarlet, Snake Eyes, and the G.I. Joe team like never before. The cover for this does show Cobra Commander holding essentially Aladdin's lamp with the genie inside, and it has that little, smoke coming out of it. And that is a fun premise. If I was to make a change in editorial, I'd probably take Snake Eyes out, who really wasn't used that much in the G.I. Joe series in 85, 86. I mean, he was there, but he wasn't a focus like in the comic. And I'd pop in, my favorite trio, Quick Kick, Alpine, and Bazooka. Just about any other speaking Joe, because they would be more of that Sunbow flavor rather than concentrating on Snake Eyes, who's exploded in popularity, not because of the cartoon. But Cobra Commander's scheme has that ring of Sunbow to it that somebody like Ron Friedman, Chuck Dixon, or Flint Dille would have had fun with back in the day. So it is with cautious optimism I look forward to this series. I like what I've read from the creative team, although my past history with cartoon-based G.I. Joe in a comic book has been a mixed bag at best. But what I have learned in other instances is past history doesn't always indicate the future performance. Also, since the last time recorded, I read issue 287 of G.I. Joe, and it is the newbie issue. Now, the first thing I'd like to do is mention Mark Seddon of the Talking Joe podcast for writing into Mr. Hama and suggesting to go back to Cobra Island. That was something that I thought I had seen, that Larry had pretty much lost interest in going back to that area of his fictional world. But Larry seemed to be open to it, and this is the issue where he goes back. So thank you, Mark, for suggesting. I've been dying to go back to Cobra Island myself since issue 134, because God only knows how Zorana, Cesspool, and Firefly got off. Probably one of the reasons why Hama was willing to go back to Cobra Island after all this time was he has the newbies, right? So now he has fresh eyes to explore the island with. So maybe that was the wedge that Hama needed, or the impetus to get him more excited to go back to Cobra Island than the past 150-ish issues. The issue begins with the G.I. Joes on the whale surveying Cobra Island. And spoiler alert, there was a lot for me to like in this issue. When Hama does these spotlight issues, he seems to shine. It just seems to be his bailiwick to do these concise 20-page stories, and he's still able to move an overarching storyline along while just concentrating on a piece of it at the time. So this is really good. I really enjoyed it. And there are 4 newbies in this issue. Sherlock, who has been around for a little while, Molto, Black Hat, and Mongoose. And their guide, in a very welcoming returning role, is Outback. And the more I experience Outback, the more I love the character, or I love the figure. So it was really good to see Outback back. The insertion of the team is well done with the right amount of drama and tension. It's a good 4 to 5 pages of story before it transitions into what is going on in Cobra Island. The Cobra Casino. Hey, see? In Connecticut, we started with the Native Americans having casinos, and now I'm bringing it back. Thanksgiving. So we're back on the island with good old Dr. Mindbender and our pal CG Laura 343. She's with a cane, an arm in a sling, and an eye patch, and a scar running down that left eye with the eye patch. She survived the building collapse in Springfield. Yay! But what else is back? The brainwave scanner. Okay, this is a storyline crutch for Mr. Hama. I get it, but ugh. Come on. So, the rest of the issue is filled with the recon team infiltrating the casino, while also providing concise origin stories for Mongoose and Black Hat. Hama does a fine job with the one-page stories for these characters' motivations and why they're on the G.I. Joe team or why they joined the military. The pacing is great in this book, and again, I got to reiterate, Hama is doing a great job by moving the overall A Real American Hero universe forward while telling this story. But again, the brainwave scanner, so that is the detractor of this. Now, Billy Penn did the art and the colors by Jay Brown, and I gotta admit that Penn's layouts and storytelling are strong, but his finishes with the inking seems to be uneven at best. I understand why IDW is making the decision to have the penciling and inking done by the same artists on these spotlight issues, but I still prefer to see a penciler and inker team. And unfortunately, ever since Gallant and Shearer did a large part of this run, and they did it very well consistently, they seem to be my standard, and I judge everything based on how they're doing, how they did it. And while that may not be fair to the artist that's currently doing the book, you see what 2 different artists can bring to the table. The only issue I really had with Penn's artwork, other than the inking side, was in the storytelling side. He did a scene where Molto shoots a tire out on a Cobra Steel Crusher. So he shoots the tire out, and then about 5 panels later, he points the silenced pistol at a Viper's head, and there's smoke coming out of the barrel. Now, with comics as a storytelling medium, the gun all of a sudden having smoke coming out of the barrel moments afterwards would indicate that the barrel was smoking all that time after the shot. That was just like one small detractor. On overall, the art was solid. I really do think that Penn's pencils are great. I just wish somebody went over and inked it. That's just me. And then speaking of S.L. Gallant, just before I'm recording this, he announced that he's back on G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero. We have gotten to see some good talent since he was last involved inside this book, but I am indeed looking forward to seeing his work again. He does draw my favorite Scarlet. Well, was that enough comic talk this episode? I think so. before I go into the review, I just want to say last week I was able to get Wednesday off, and I spent it in my basement. Now, when I was in my basement, did I do my video footage for my YouTube versions? No. Did I use it as a day to get ahead on recordings? Nope. I just spent most of it cleaning. Organizing, throwing out, piling, sorting, just trying to clean the mess in my basement. I did a whole day off of work, and I spent about 6 hours figuring out what I need to move and what I need to get rid of and all sorts of things, and taking up and organizing space. And it wasn't without its distractions. Going through, I found a couple wild cards. I put them in the box with some more wild cards. And I found a wild card with a broken T-hook, so I absolutely had to fix it. You know, I found a tiger cat that I put off to the side about a year ago to fix, and I fixed that. Overall, it was a productive day, but, I did do a couple other things that weren't exactly related to cleaning up the mess. But during that cleaning time, I did trip over one vehicle. Was not one, not two, but 3 little 1985 Armadillos. I did not realize I had 4 of them in my collection, because the 4th one is on display on my transportable tactical battle platform. And I'm going to close out the episode looking at it. In 1985, the Armadillo mini tank was released to the world by Hasbro for the G.I. Joe team. Now, the Armadillo is essentially a little infantry tank, and it has 4 guns sticking out on a turret, 2 treads that hide 2 rollers, so the treads are stationary, and it rolls around on your floor like a little Matchbox car. It's essentially pretty much molded only in 2 colors, green with gray. You have a gray roll bar for 2 characters to hold on to the back. You have a spot for 1 character in the turret. The 2 gray treads and the 2 gray wheels, and everything else is green. Now, the other cool thing about the Armadillo is it's pretty easy to take apart, which I did to look at some of them. One of my 4 is glued together, so that went into the get rid of pile, and took it apart because I thought the treads were mismatched. And then I find out there's this big R and a big L on each one. So they are side specific. So I tried to switch them to make them look better, because if you look on the underside, it looks almost like the treads are shifted back about a half an inch too much. So I switched them side to side, even though, I put R on L and L on R. And then the roller didn't quite match in the groove it was supposed to go in. So I switched it back. Can't say I wasn't a little disappointed, but it's cool. It's put together properly. Talking about this, I looked up the blueprints because I don't have the blueprints, at least anywhere I found. I went on 3D Joe's to look at their scan. And so you're looking at what it has. So the 4 cannons are 60mm synchronized variable range cluster cannons. For my non-metric friends, 60mm is roughly a 2.36 or 2 3/8 inch diameter shell. And something that big, I would think, is manually loaded. I don't think you're going to have a shell that size on an auto feed belt. So when I'm looking at this, while the cannons do seem to be in proportion to that size, I would think that it'd be happier medium with the size of this tank, and also for the repeatability of fire for a one-man crew, because you can't drive, aim, and load like in a typical tank. A typical tank has a crew of 4, and one of them is the loader, one of them is the driver, one of them is the guy who actually fires the tank, and then you have the guy in charge of the tank commander. And this tank only has a crew of 1, and it gets 2 people that can hang on. So I would think, from my point of view, that those 4 cans are 50mm auto-fed with chains. This would be a great tank and because of the size, it would be better suited for as a tracked infantry weapon. So, especially with the 50mm, you'd be able to wipe out hordes and hordes of enemies, or in this case, cobra bats. The front of the Armadillo reminds me a little bit of the Vamp. So it has that little bit of a slanted nose, has a little winch in front, and then you move up top and on the left side, or the driver's left side, you have a little gas opening there, the little thing, the 6 prongs where you'd put like your fuel in. That's typical on many other G.I. Joe vehicles at that time. Little bit of an odd choice, putting your gas fill or your fuel fill in the front. Seems like an obvious target for enemies. The covering on the sides, the side skirts for the treads, is nice. The turret swivels left to right. It has 180 degrees of motion from, full left to full right. And, the guns pivot up and down. And on mine, the guns are pointed a little bit together so that it would be aimed for some place out. So they're coming together as to a single point somewhere down the range. One thing that you can tell, this is a value vehicle. It's very simple. When you put the figure in the opening for the turret, the figure doesn't necessarily turn with the turret. So maybe the figure is driving and that there is an auto aim and fire mechanism inside the Armadillo. That would be probably the best way, but sometimes you wonder why it would only be one man at that point, because he can't drive and then look down and be like, oh, switch target, hit the button. So this would probably need a very sophisticated software suite in 1985. The other thing is, the Armadillo probably could benefit from being a little bit larger and being a 2-person tank. But guess what? What does that sound like? If you're thinking what I'm thinking of, you're thinking of the Cobra Hiss. And it would be a direct competitor for the Hiss. So I think overall, the Armadillo is the main competitor to the Cobra Hiss. Going back to the blueprints, in front you also have the primary engine radiator. Again, so a front engine tank, typically tanks are rear engined for obvious reasons, because as you're driving forward, you don't want to be immobilized easy on. So this is a front engine tank. So that does, again, not the best. For lack of a better term, the tank's just a really cute vehicle. It's straightforward, doesn't really make too much sense from a military application, but it is a fun G.I. Joe toy, and fun is where it counts. With that, I do have a kind of a rule, like in my collection, it's like, how does this fit in? And G.I. Joe, we know, has a lot of fantasy elements about it. Where do I place the Armadillo? Well, because of its media appearances in Sunbow, this is a must-own. How much do I have? In a large collection, how much do I have? And especially as I'm paring down. Well, like I said, I didn't even know I had 4. I had the one on my TTBP. I absolutely love the fact that I have 2. I am not sad with having 3, but 4, even if my 4th one didn't have the halves glued together, would be and is too much. This is small enough to have a few. It has a place in my display. It actually also has garnered a second display. So while the one is down here with my TTBP, one of the 3 has moved upstairs. It is now residing as the vehicle to go with my Outpost Defender and my Watchtower. So it fits in with the theme, and I love it. On a scale of 5 60mm shells, this is a good 3 shells. And it's 3 shells because besides everything I mentioned, what helps it is it's small, but what takes away from it is it's just not practical in a real military application. So that brings to who is going to man the Armadillo in the G.I. Joe Army. I've been playing with it a little bit, and it's been mostly airtight upstairs. Duke has had a go around going with this wonderful, the 1985 Sunbow theme. Bazooka, Dusty, a command car for Flint. It is definitely a 1985 vehicle. It's rounded where it needs to be rounded. It is sharp edges where it needs to be sharp edges. It is that perfect mix of being still slightly futuristic, but very well grounded. And, you know, the other cool thing is the fact that you can still put a 1988 Armadillo action figure in your 1985 Armadillo, and you can have an Armadillo in an Armadillo. That really concludes, because I am now getting the high sign to wrap things up, and I'm seeing Chaplain Katzenbogen coming back to the station with several coolers filled with ice and fish. I'm hoping one of the other guys got a turkey as we're getting ready to chow down. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I help co-host a couple Pint of Comics episodes. Episode 217 will be out about the same time this episode drops, and is about the best toys from before 1990. And by best toys, I mean action figures. I may have rolled heavy with one particular toy line, and I'm not going to lie, it was Rock Lords. It also guests John of the Shocking Things podcast, a horror and cult movie podcast. He's a good dude. It's a fun podcast and something to check out if that's your bag. I listened to his Revenge of the Ninja episode, and it was actually pretty fun. It was a pretty fun listen. That's been this episode of the Chaplain's Assistant's Motorpod, the strange but not estranged nerdy little brother of the PinoComics.com broadcasting family. We stopped just short of getting matching facial plastic surgery. The Chaplain's Assistant's Motorpod can be found on Anchor.fm, our host, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and other fine podcasting platforms. Also, I should be uploading these to YouTube's on the Pina Comics and my own Chaplain's Assistant's Motorpod channel. Like, comment, rate, hit that bell. Anything you do interacting with this podcast only helps it get better and grow. I can be found on social media on Twitter and Instagram at ChaplainJoePod, and introducing the new email, derivatively enough, chaplainjoepod@gmail.com. I tend to spend a lot of time at Twitter. I'm nowhere near good or versed enough on Instagram to be any real threat, and the email's brand new, but I know when to click reply versus reply all. And that is it for the 14th episode of the podcast that delivers the G.I. Joe missiles to the masses. And I do want to include one more. A fellow podcaster by the name of Dino Gangale of the podcast passed away unexpectedly earlier this year. He was a positive influence, and he has a sentiment that has been resonating and echoing inside of me for a long time, and I would also like to continue to pass it on. Be decent to each other. See ya.